Hello everybody. How are you? I hope you're doing well wherever you are in the world. And if you're not, then I hope we can provide some light entertainment for you. How about that? That's a good idea. Right. Bad weather outside. It started to rain. And no, I did not feel the earthquake. It's all right. I'm okay. Don't panic about it. My daughter lives down in Wellington, which is kind of near where the earthquake centre was. There was one overnight, last night sometime, and she didn't feel it either. Oh well, some people do and some people don't. That's the case. And no, it wasn't big enough to cause any major issues. And the reason I mention it is because I have a lot of friends overseas who hear New Zealand earthquake and then they get a bit panicky about whether I'm okay or not. I have taken to drawing maps on Google and then editing saving maps from Google, putting some edited overlays on it, like a circle around the general area I am with a big arrow pointing to it saying Jev lives here, and then a circle with a big dot in the middle as to where the epicenter of the earthquake is and saying earthquake was here, and then a distance thing saying how many hundreds and hundreds of miles or kilometres it was between them, which is why I'm not likely to be as affected by it as people who live nearer to the epicenter. Anyway, so aside from that, there's not a lot else been going on here. Successfully had our meeting this afternoon that I'm normally part of. I remembered to turn on my microphone and check it was working. Oh, look, the captions look like they're working better than those ones we had last time. Yeah, a lot, and they look a lot better than the ones that we had last time too. I'm hoping that they continue to be so, but let me know. I can experiment with a different version of English. I was going to say a different language, but it's not. It's the same language, but effectively it's almost like a dialogue, but it's more to do with accents. So in the past, I have found that the language detector thingy that does the captions recognises what I'm saying most accurately if I use UK English. You'd think it would work for Kiwi English, New Zealand English, but for some reason it thinks more accurately in UK English for the way I speak. I don't know what that is. Oh, and yes, my throat is a little bit sore. We've got somebody in the family with a cold at the moment, and so I'm hoping I'm not going to come down with it. I'll be having a gargle after I've finished here. Warm, salty water. Gargle. It helps to wash out the bugs that are in your throat, and also to soothe it too, just in case you're wondering. So I better say hi to anyone who's new here. Hi, I'm Jev. I read old children's books such as these ones here, just reaching behind my magic curtain, such as these sort of ones here. This one is over 100 years old. This one is 125 years old. Yes, I read books as old as that, and sometimes even older. There you go. Yes, my magic curtain. I read them because those are the books I had ready access to at home when I was growing up, because they were my parents' and my grandparents' books from when they were children. And it was a great way to be able to have a story to read that wasn't quite the same as what you could pick up from the school library. It was educational, but also entertaining. Educational without realizing it was, because it expanded my understanding of what the world was like. I wasn't fixed with the belief that the way the world is now where I live is the only normal, that it has been different to that in other places at other times. And it's a great way for kids to grow up, to have this understanding that they are not the centre of the world and that the world has to comply with the way they currently see it, that the world is indeed very different to that and much more diverse than that. And I think that's a great thing. And I think we actually need to recognise the possibilities that come with that. So part of that means that we will have some stories that are, and I'm just going to type something in my chat here. My keyboard's over here and my microphone's here, instead of my microphone here and my keyboard here, fighting for space. So I'm hoping that it's going to work. We'll see. Sorry, I'm just typing in the command. I've just typed in the disclaimer, which is basically what the situation is with ideas and words and language and attitudes that are in the books that we read that aren't necessarily ones that we specifically agree with. We be us in general, not specifically or exclusively me. Okay. Um, I believe that we can be exposed to things that aren't necessarily something that we agree with, that we may actually consider to be quite wrong, as long as they're not too extreme. I believe we can have exposure to that in a way that allows us to learn from it in a good way, not a bad way. Helps us to reinforce our understanding of what is appropriate and also to recognize things that aren't appropriate and to avoid them when we come across them. It's probably the best way I can think of to put it at the moment, because my brain is a bit weird with words sometimes. I may end up cutting this stream short today just because I'm noticing that the back of my nose and throat are a little bit more uncomfortable than I thought. We'll see what happens. So I'm just going to read the disclaimer for you so you're covered. This stream includes works of fiction / or auto or even actual biographies. Any references to events, people, or places, real, imaginary, past, or present, are used at the discretion of the author's memories. So there you go. That covers things like historic facts as they've been written at the time by that author that we are reading. It doesn't necessarily mean that other people will have seen it the same way at the same time. At the discretion of the author's memories, imaginations, and external sources. These works may include negative depictions, slang, terminology, mistreatment of people or cultures, which may trigger some audiences. Rather than remove or alter this content, we acknowledge its impact with reasonable and moderated conversation. And the place for that conversation is over on the Discord server, not in the stream. It is my stream. I am inviting you here to be part of my stream and to be part of the community, but that does not mean that you get to say how it is going to be. There are some words, very few, but there are some words I do not use. I generally keep language clean because I want this to be a safe place for grannies and their grandkids to be able to enjoy something that they may actually find a little more familiar than modern media. For them to be able to share it with their grandkids instead of their grandkids having to share everything with them. So they have shared experience that is based from stuff that grandma knows instead of just what the kids know, which modern media tends to be. And also I would like them to recognise, to be able to discover that the internet is not necessarily all bad, that there are some good places and good things and good people around, and you can enjoy those things as long as you keep your head and be sensible. So there you go. That's why we have bans on certain language usage in our chat, but which means that some things don't come through on chat because they're moderated, but also why there are certain words I don't use personally. There have been once or twice in a story I'm reading where there is a word that I consider completely and utterly inappropriate. So I will not read that word. I will substitute something else for it. But other than that, I do not censor what I am reading. I will still read a chapter that has a little bit of animal cruelty in it because it's part of the story and it was part of the era at the time. I may give you a slight discussion about it after I've read that little section to help people to process it, but it does not mean that I agree with what they were doing at the time. Just because I read it doesn't mean I necessarily agree with it, okay? We are sensible, we are adults, we can think for ourselves. So please, engage your brain, even if it is time for us to have some entertainment here. There is, like I say, a wide variety of topics that we cover here in our books, but that's just the nature of reading books. I only read children's books. I read public domain books. They are generally easily available on Project Gutenberg, and I shall give you a link for that. There are some of these will pop up while I'm actually reading a bit later on a timer. They'll show up in chat. No. Trying to spell correctly when I'm leaning in the wrong direction to what I usually do. So Project Gutenberg is where I often get the digital versions of the books if I don't have a physical copy like those ones I just waved at you. These days, I have a tendency for most of my reading to be on this first generation iPad mini. I love the fact that it is not in the rubbish bin. It is not in the pull it apart to recycle it, or we're going to pretend that we're going to pull it apart to recycle it, but we're going to incinerate it department. Sorry, I'm just plugging in my charger for it because I just realised it's not actually as charged as I thought it was. Probably because I was using it yesterday. So I like keeping things in use rather than trashing things. And I think there's a lot of stuff in life that's like that. Why get yourself something that you can use once or twice and then have to throw it away when in actual fact you can keep using it? This one is a children's hair clip, a unicorn hair clip, hence the little horn on top. But it's something that I reuse. There you go. It was worth it because it gets reused and reused and reused and reused. That is one good thing that we can learn from older lifestyles. I do remember hearing of some young thing asking their grandmother about recycling. Grandma, did you used to recycle? No. And young thing was rather shocked because recycling is important. And then grandmother went on and explained that it wasn't called recycling. It was just normal. You didn't waste things. You didn't throw away things. If you could reuse something, you reused it. If it could be turned into something else to be reused in another manner, you would do so. Because everything you had, either it was you had because of your physical labour or the physical labour you have done to earn the money to be able to have it. And it wasn't easily done. So therefore you looked after things and you reused things where you could. So there are some good things that used to go on that we have come back to doing. It's just we have new names for them. There was something else I was going to say for those who are new here. Oh yeah, 3 tips. Sorry, I forgot about those. I have 3 tips that I give people who are new to our community here, just because it makes reading a lot more comfortable and easy to enjoy and keep enjoying. So the first tip is drinks, the second tip is snacks, and the third tip is comfort. I should say it with me, because we're basically at that stage, aren't we? So I always have water handy because water is great for your voice. It's also great for your brain, and it's great for the rest of your body. Your body needs water to function. So as a bare minimum, you must always have water available to drink. I actually won't drink from my favourite water bottle because it tips over very easily, and I don't really need a lot of water everywhere when I'm in the middle of reading a story and I have lots of technology around me that's reliant on electricity. I tend to drink from this, like so. But you don't have to stick with water. You are welcome to have whatever it is that your favourite drink is, as long as it's appropriate for where you are and the time of day it is. So I have some coffee, which I made just before. A double shot espresso with foamed milk, steamed milk. So there you go. Very nice. Very nice. That's my favourite otherwise. And snacks. So that's tip 1 is drinks. Snacks. I've got snacks handy. Have you? I have a friend an online friend who one day I'll actually get to meet her in real life because she lives in the same country as me. But she was saying that she often forgets that she needs to have drinks and snacks handy when I'm reading and she's here. But that's all right. That's a bit of a laugh between the two of us. So treat time. What snacks have you got handy? This is my treat jar. This is a reminder for me to say, look, you can actually give me coffee tips. Coffee being the online tip site that you can use. And I do have a coffee account. That's what that QR code is for. But I do have a link for it on my profile too. So if you can't read it with your phone because you're watching the stream with your phone, then just have a look on my profile. You'll find my coffee link somewhere in my multitude of information. So today we have some ginger nuts. Sorry, you don't need to see the cellophane. Ginger nuts. I'm not taking those out of the bag because I did that last time and forgot to actually eat it. When I came back up to my desk the next morning, it was covered in ants. They were everywhere. It was seething with ants. Not my idea of great fun. So I'm going to now put my jar back over here. So it's nice to have a little jar that I keep treats in. And it's got a little silicone seal on it, so the ants generally up till now haven't managed to get in. I try to make sure I put the lid on properly, so I'm going to get out of here. Licorice. I hear ants love them. Ants. Yeah, very good. Well done. And hi, Q. Great to have you here, Coleslaw. So I'm just leaning over here to try and put this down in the jar well enough that I can shut it and the ants won't get in. Yes, ginger nuts, the ants as well. Love them. How is Aunt? Have you heard? She was away on holiday reasonably recently, as far as I remember. Not sure. I think that's what it was. Anyway, and so that's why we haven't seen her around recently. Okay, drinks, snacks. So before I get started, you might want to quickly rush off and get yourself some drinks and snacks if you haven't already got them. Q's saying she just got back this week and has an interview tomorrow, so she's been quite anxious. I totally understand and pass on my regards. All fingers and toes crossed and everything like that for the interview. I hope it goes the way she wants it to. So there. Drinks, snacks, comfort. Yeah, I have ADHD, in case anyone didn't know. It's pretty obvious, isn't it? Thank you. Do let her know, yes. I have a lovely overstuffed cushion that I like the colour and the texture. This is all felted here. Not felted, flocked here. And this is all rattly sort of fabric. And it's always a good reminder to me that if you're going to enjoy a story, then get yourself somewhere comfortable. When I finally have my reading corner set up, all the stuff that's behind my green screen that's in boxes and piled up all over the place, because that's the storage part of the house, the back of my office. We don't have proper shelves yet. We are building the house ourselves. We've been building it for 16 or 17 years. We've been living in it for 15 or 16 years. And so there are some aspects of it that haven't been finished yet, but that's okay. We'll get there. So when I do finally get my reading area set up properly, it's going to be a bigger office space than I currently work within, but this is currently part of the overall space it will be in. I will also have bookshelves. I've got 2 sets of bookshelves that I'm going to be using, and I have several old lounge chairs and a newer one that fits in with all those. And I also have lots of lovely little bits and pieces that I will actually put somewhere that a camera can pick them up, so you can actually enjoy little details of things. They're all things that remind me of aspects of the different stories that we read, things that come from other times and places, basically. But I will also have some nice cushions and things. And this one's looking forward to having its home finally. Right. Yes, I know, you fell over. I'll put you up properly. And I'm hoping that my microphone's picking me up well enough because of the fact that I've actually moved everything around a bit. What else? I think that's about it. Oh, there is a bonus tip. It is quite handy to have a pen and paper when I'm reading stories, because often we will discuss things that are old-fashioned or completely unknown, probably because they're old-fashioned, and sometimes people want to find out more about it, or they hear about something that they want to follow up on. So if you have a pen and paper handy, or a digital version of that if you want to, it doesn't really matter. You can use a pencil, you can use a sharp stick, you can use toothpaste and your finger on the wall if it's your house and you're going to clean up afterwards. Whatever, I don't really mind. The the comment pen and paper or pencil and paper is actually just a shorthand for you being able to take notes in whatever way it suits you, um, and the people that live around you too. So that if you want to look something up, you can do so. If you want to find out and follow up on something that we touch on, or you are reminded of something when I'm reading a story, then you don't have to lose that information because you're actually receiving all this story stuff coming in at the same time and distracting you from the thing that the thought that occurred to you. Um, a lot of these extra things that I mention like this are just because these are the sort of things that happen in my brain when um, I'm really busy or there's lots of stuff going on or whatever else like that that's going on. So a lot of it's just life experience based on what life is like for me when I'm talking about these things. I never assume that everybody else has those issues, but I am never surprised when I discover that people do have those same things happen to them. So in case you're wondering, ADHD, very, very easily distracted, which makes for wonderful opportunities when we come across new bits of information in books, or should I say old bits of information. But also not just ADHD, also a little bit of autism. There you go. In case you've been wondering, in case you haven't been here every time I've said it before, yes, I am fairly definitely on the spectrum. No, I do not have a diagnosis because I've successfully got this far, if you want to call it that, this far through life without one. It's not going to add anything to the way I live or any concessions made to me at this stage because I'm in my late 50s and they're not going to start suddenly providing me with educational home help because I'm not a 10-year-old boy who's not fitting in at school, which is where most of that sort of thing is aimed, unfortunately. It would be nice, but it's unnecessary. I would have to pay for it myself. I don't have the money for that because I don't have a paying job. Anyway, so enough about all of those sort of things. The thing that lends to our stories is that when we go off on a rabbit trail, it's a doozy, usually. We find out all sorts of things. My brain is also very, very good at connecting the dots on stuff that other people often don't necessarily recognize how they go together. It's very, very common for people who are on the spectrum to actually go, that makes sense, and it's got these features of it or these factors involved. This also does, in the same way. I wonder if those are connected. And then doing a little bit of thinking it through and reading about it and stuff and discovering for yourself that yes, there is a connection between these things that nobody else has actually recognised before. So we recognise patterns in the lightest little details sometimes. It's not a superpower, but sometimes it feels like it to other people, that we have these amazing abilities to do some of these things. No, we're not idiot savants, all of us, or anything like that. That used to be one of the phrases that was used. We're not all like Rain Man, who has limitations in the way that he understood and expressed things. We are ordinary people living ordinary lives, and we just have a brain that functions differently to a lot of the rest of the world. And it's wonderful, the opportunities it gives us, but it also has some drawbacks, like trying to decode what people mean when they say something, because I know that they don't just mean literally what they've said. And I know this because it doesn't quite make sense if they're saying that, for it to be that literally. And I know that it doesn't make sense because I had a bad experience with taking something literally that somebody said when I was a kid. And that sticks with you for life because it's an ongoing thing that happens. So therefore, you tend to approach situations with other people where they say things very cautiously because you're trying to assess what they really mean when they're saying something. Whereas if you're with a bunch of autistics, like in the meeting that I had earlier on today, what we say is what we say. That's it. And if somebody doesn't understand something, they'll ask and it will be clarified. And we also realise that our own personal little view of the world is the world that we see, but it may not be what somebody else sees. So we will state something very bluntly that this is how it is. And then somebody else will say, I don't understand. What are you talking about? And then we'll go, oh, yeah, that's right. Maybe you see it differently. And so we'll explain why we said that. And then the other person will go, oh, I never saw it like that before. And we all learn from it. It's great, actually. Find yourself a bunch of people to socialize with, even if it's online, who see the world in some of the ways that you see the world, in terms of the way you're thinking. Sorry, it's tickling me. The hair is tickling me. And yes, I've got a little bit of hair that's see-through because there's some green in the unicorn hair. Some of the ways that you see the world that they have in common. Don't limit yourself to just being friends with the people who live in the houses near you and work in the same places as you. Give your brain a break and enjoy being with other people who value you for who you are. That's a little bit of what I enjoy with being here in this context, is because we find each other more readily. That's a fabulous thing about the internet. I love it. The possibilities of finding other people who we can connect with, even if we don't have lots of things in common, even if the way I see myself and my, yes, I will use these words, my gender and my sexuality and that sort of thing is quite different to the way other people see themselves and how they fit into the world. I can still get on well with somebody who has a different way of seeing themselves, even if to me outwardly they might appear to have a lot of similarity. But I can get on well with them because I know that they are being themselves in the world that they live in. And we have lots of things in common, and we don't have to be exactly the same. We can celebrate being who we are without putting down who somebody else is. I think that's fantastic. And it's so much easier to find each other now that we have the internet. Don't you think so? Now, that's the maximum I'm going to say about those particular differences that can be divisive for some people or can be hurtful for some people, because the people around them in their own natural lives may not be accepting of them. So we will focus on books today. Yeah. And I do hope you feel included here, however you see yourself, because you're meant to be. But it's not the place where we do all the big discussions on it. I do the discussions on some things. And then if you want to talk about some stuff, that's okay. But we do that not here on stream. We do that in Discord. And don't forget that the focus of my Discord is our old books. Okay? So here we go. We are going to read... Sorry, I have to unlock it again. My brain has gone off on a whole series of rabbit trails. And I'm like, what am I doing? Oh, I'm reading a book. That's right. Sorry about that. I love you all, you wonderful people. So keep coming back. It's great having you here. We are reading A Terrible Tomboy by Angela Brazel. And yes, there are aspects of this story which I definitely don't agree with in terms of gender roles and all sorts of things like that. But we are going to accept that that is how the world was at the time the lady wrote the story, and that in herself she actually did help to bring about some changes of attitude through her years and years and years of writing. So let's grant her that grace, okay? She was doing what she could, even though she had limited experience. And yes, we are going to come across one of those chapters that shows up the difference between then and now. Definitely. So here we go. A Terrible Tomboy by Angela Brazel. And this is chapter 14, Lilian's Housekeeping. So the children in the story, the children in the story are Lilian, who is the oldest, and she is 15 or 16, I think, and Peggy, who is 9 or 10, and Bobby, who is 6 or 7 maybe, but I'm not sure. I can't remember if it's even been mentioned, but we're going to carry on with the story. Lilian is very obviously the oldest in the family, and she tends to just be a little bit more compliant with how society at the time expected people to be. The family are a family that are an old family, as in they have lived in this part of England for generations, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. They have owned land there. They have gradually lost um, most of what they had that was valuable just because that's the way it goes. If you're not a grasping sort of a person, the value of things get less and less and less. You have to sell more, all that sort of stuff. So they're a family who are on hard times now. They talk about being poor, poor relatively speaking, when they compare themselves with others who are of the same part of society that they are technically from. Not poor like some of the others that they interact with who really are genuinely poor. But when you have lived in a family place for generations and you know that this is the expectation of how things are done, and you can't do that because you don't have the money or the property to be able to do that anymore, you see yourself as being poor. That's part of the story. So, chapter 14, Lilian's Housekeeping. Thou wert working late, thou busy, busy bee. After the fall of the cistus flower, when the primrose tree blossom was ready to burst, I heard thee last as I saw thee first. In the silence of the evening hour, I heard thee, thou busy, busy bee. Aunt Helen was married in September, with the rector to read the service and father to give her away. Now, Aunt Helen has been the lady of the house for years and years and years because the children's mother died. And she is sister to father. And so she had been part of the family and acted as mother to the children, bringing them up. Lilian and Peggy were bridesmaids, while the Sunday school children strewed the path from the church door with flowers, and Bobby flung rice and old shoes after the carriage. Yes, old shoes used to be a done thing after weddings. Very English sort of a thing. Don't know why. There's probably some reason. Maybe you can write that down and look it up and put it over in our Discord server. And I'm pretty sure that Discord is going to, at some stage, tell us some of these things, like my Discord link, rather than me stopping and typing them all in. And hi to everybody over on YouTube. Sorry, I know I've been doing lots of talking that's very specific to the Twitch stream. But hey, you should be used to this by now. Thank you for being here. Welcome. And thank you for listening. Right. Trying to find where I was. All the village people came to watch and say how sweet and pretty she looked, and to wish health and happiness to Mrs. John Neville, because in those days when women got married, they took on their husband's name, including addressing them as Mrs. whatever his name was. Things felt very flat when the excitement was all over and the last of the guests had left the abbey. Abbey is the name of where they live. It used to actually be an abbey, but all that's left is ruins and the old farmhouse, which is why I've got this picture here. It's not the same as what theirs was, but it's a similar era. And the last of the guests had left the abbey, and the children found themselves wishing that life could be a perpetual round of bouquets and favours and wedding cake, not forgetting presents for the bridesmaids, for Lilian and Peggy were the proud possessors of charming gold lockets set with turquoises, with portraits of Aunt Helen inside them, the gifts of the bridegroom, as the local paper described them, while a silver watch and chain consoled Bobby for not taking a more prominent part in the ceremony, and made him declare that his new uncle was a brick and no mistake. After so much dissipation, it was quite hard to settle down to plain prose again, but the school had already reopened, and the children had stolen an extra week of holidays to join in the festivities, so it was high time that they were setting to work once more. It seemed strange to start off every morning without Lilian. And I'm not going to bother explaining because I'm sure the story does. Without Lilian, who only went into Warford once a week now for music lessons, and Mr. Vaughan had occasional qualms as to the safety of allowing such youthful jevvs to drive about the country unattended. Jehu was a wasteful young man who used to drive at breakneck speed in biblical stories, I think. Anyway, so that's an old cultural reference. To drive about the country unattended, so it was just the two younger ones, Peggy and Bobby. But the little yellow pony trap was so well known on the road that it would have been rather difficult for anything to happen to the children. People knew the time of their passing and looked out for them daily. Kindly women would come to cottage doorways to nod and smile. The innkeeper at the halfway arms set his clock by their arrival. They had struck up quite a friendship with the postman, 2 milkmen, and the driver of a fish cart, while the old man who broke stones by the roadside always nodded and gave them good morning, and fired a facetious remark or two after them, which the children imagined he must relieve the monotony of his work by composing during the intervals of their coming and going. Now, an old man who broke stones by the roadside. That's how they used to have the stones small enough to be the metal on the road surface. The stones on the road surface was somebody's job was to break them down into smaller pieces. So certain types of stones were used for town streets, and they were cobbles or sets, and that means that they are a type of granite that are broken. Cobbles, I think, are about this big, and they're broken down into roughly cubed shapes, and then they are put into place, and then sets at ones that are more, I think, brick shaped. And it was somebody's job to sit there at the side of the road with a pile of the raw materials and knock them into the right shape with a hammer, maybe, and a chisel, I don't know, but you would get a technique where you'd hit the stone exactly the right way and you knew which way it was going to break so that you could actually use as little effort as possible to get it into the right shape. But every stone that was put into a cobbled street was broken into that shape with someone sitting with a hammer and knocking them into shape. Every single stone of a cobbled street. And the reason they used cobbled streets was because those stones would mean that the road surface would stay fairly even for a lot longer than if it was just little small angular stones like we usually have on our non-sealed roads. They weren't using asphalt at that stage. Anyway, carrying on. So that's what the reference was to this old gentleman who was breaking stones. Left alone, Lilian tried to settle down in dead earnest to battle with her task of housekeeping. It was a heavy burden for such young shoulders, for in a farmhouse there is always a great deal of extra work to be done. Pigs, poultry, and young animals to be fed, and the eggs gathered in the inn daily. The dairy claimed constant attention, for the pans must be scalded and the pails polished bright, and though Joe did the milking and churning, it was Lilian's business to superintend the making of the butter and to weigh each pound with her own hands and print it with the Abbey stamp. So what you used to do was you would milk your cows and then have the milk sitting in containers for long enough that the cream would separate from the main milk. So cream rises to the top because it's lighter, it floats more, and you'd take the cream off the top and then you would churn it. There are a lot of different ways of doing it. If you want to do it yourself, what you do is you just get some cream from the shop. Don't use really, really, really fresh cream. You use cream that's a little bit older. So when you're looking at the supermarket shelves and it's got the expiry date on the cream, and you've got one that says it's going to expire this week, and then you've got another one that says it's going to expire in 2 weeks' time. If you're trying to make butter, go for the one that's going to expire later on this week, because it's much, much easier to make butter with cream that has gathered together and strengthened its hold on itself, which is what older cream does compared with the fresh. The fresh tends to hold all the other liquids in it a lot more. Just one of those things. Anyway, so then they would churn it. If you want to make yourself butter, which is what I was going to say, you get the cream and you put it into a glass jar and you shake it. Put a lid on it, obviously, and you shake it, 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 and you shake it. And eventually the cream starts to bind together tighter and tighter, and it knocks the extra liquids away from the rest of it, and that you start to get runny bits and clumpy bits. And eventually you get to the point where basically you get a few lumps of butter, because that's what the cream has become, and then you have buttermilk, which is the separated out liquids. And then you can rinse it. You put water through it just to rinse it out to get because the less buttermilk it has in it, the longer the butter will last before it goes off. Did you know that? And then you can mix salt through it if you want to, or you can use it as it is and then put salt on it or with it. when you use it. So that is a simple way of making butter. Now that's too much hard work to do it with bigger quantities. So you actually have a butter churn, which in old pictures was a long, like a barrel, but a long sort of slightly tapered shape, which had a big long stick that came up through the middle of it, and a lid which had a hole that the stick just fitted through, and you pushed this lever up and down inside, so it was smashing up and down through the liquid, the cream that's inside that churn, and eventually it does the same thing. Another way of doing it is this one where you actually turn a handle, and it's like a barrel that's flat sides here, and then the barrel boards staves around it this way, and you put the cream in through the top, and then the handle's on the side, and then inside what that handle is turning is these flat bits that poke out from the center shaft. Yeah, a little bit like a stone tumbler. The bits that are sticking out from the shaft are flat paddles, and the cream gets tossed over and over and over and over, and eventually it starts to stick together. That one is one of the easier ones to actually churn your butter with, to turn your cream into butter. And so there's a lot of work involved. And then you've got to rinse all the extra buttermilk out of it. Buttermilk was often used to help with feeding pigs. So it wasn't wasted. And there were other things you could use it for too. And it's not the same as cultured buttermilk that you get for using for baking. That's usually a little bit yogurty in terms of it's got other bacterial work in it. So it has a different property when it's actually used as a baking ingredient. But it would have started originally with the idea of the liquid that separates out from when you churn your cream to turn it into butter. What comes out of it, the extra liquid, is called buttermilk, traditionally. So that's quite a lot of work, but there's a lot of cleaning involved. You have to sterilize everything because milk goes off, goes rotten very, very easily when it's exposed to old milk that has gone off very, very quickly. And so you use a lot of hot, like boiling hot water to clean everything down, to scald it, the surfaces of it, with boiling hot water so that you kill any of those germs, so that your fresh cream and your fresh milk are not going to go rotten. Because there's no point in milking the cow if all you're going to do is let the milk go rotten and then you have to throw it away. Anyway, carrying on. Yes. Another one of our rabbit trails. Maybe we need to have a rabbit trail counter. Just like some people who play games, shooting games and stuff like that, have kill counters or death counters, like when somebody keeps getting killed in a game. Maybe we need to have rabbit trail counters. That would be funny, wouldn't it? Right, carrying on, shall we? Find out where we got to. Though Jo did the milking and churning, it was Lilian's business to superintend the making up of the butter and to weigh each pound with her own hands and print it with the Abbey stamp. So obviously butter, because they're on a farm, she would make up butter, and that was one of the things that gave them a little bit of an income, is that they would be selling the butter. Otherwise you wouldn't bother putting the Abbey stamp on it to mark it as being stuff that you guys had produced. Nancy, too, proved somewhat of a trial, for though a hard-working and most kind-hearted girl, she had not been gifted by Providence with either brains or a memory, and was capable of making the most astonishing mistakes, which she invariably justified by declaring she was sure she had done it so in Miss Vaughan's time. Not quite such an unusual thing to actually have someone who is staff for you when you have a change of leadership, for them to dig their toes in and go, I'm going to do it this way because it's easier for me, and make out that that's the way they've always done it. Drinks. But Nancy, said poor bewildered Lilian, I'm sure Aunt Helen never told you to rub up the silver with paraffin and brick dust. You're scratching it horribly. There's a packet of proper pink powder stuff to do it somewhere. There's naught like oil and brick dust for putting a polish on metals, observed Nancy, complacently scouring away at Bobby's christening mug. It beats all they rubbish that the peddlers bring round in boxes and tries hard to persuade you to buy, so it do for sure. The problem with brick dust is it's not fine enough, and so yes, it will be scratching the surface. I have no doubt about it being very good for fenders and fire irons and things of that sort, but not for the best teapot. Don't you think it would be better, Nancy, if I were to clean the silver on Friday mornings and you could get on with your kitchen? As you wish, Miss Lilian, said Nancy, relinquishing the polishing leather with no great sorrow. Miss Vaughan, she always did it her own self too. Was you going to do anything with that stock that has been in the larder since Monday? Oh, Nancy, I forgot all about it, cried Lilian, much conscience-stricken at the reminder, and I had intended to make it into soup. Do go and fetch it and see if it's still good. But the stock, alas, had accumulated a skim of green mould on the surface, and generally betrayed such symptoms of distress that it was fit for nothing but the pig trough. And when Lilian, warned by its awful example, visited her neglected shelves, she found so many forgotten scraps put away into odd corners that she straightway formed the excellent resolution of reviewing the larder daily after breakfast, having an uneasy sensation that it was one of the golden rules which Aunt Helen had particularly impressed upon her, but which, like many others, had slidden into the background of her remembrance. Yeah, when you're overwhelmed by a new job, you can have all the instructions about how to do it given to you, but because you're still processing, learning what you're doing, it's very, very easy to forget a whole bunch of it that might be quite important. It was certainly one thing to housekeep. Let me know if you want to do the jigsaw puzzle. Sorry, I totally forgot about that. Let me know if you do want to. It's certainly one thing to housekeep with Aunt Helen at her elbow to advise, and quite another to puzzle it out with only her memory and the cookery book for assistance. The quantities required for a family of 5 persons was a subject which took her some time to master. There's the butcher's boy at the back door, miss, observed Nancy one morning, a few days after the wedding, putting her head into the rose parlour and interrupting the bridal march from Lohengrin, which Lilian was trying over on the piano. He's left his cart at the bottom of the drive, but he'll fetch up anything you want. The butcher only came round weekly at Gorswin, so Lilian abandoned her music and sallied forth to give her first order. We've got tired of great sirloins of beef and legs of mutton, she announced. Haven't you anything else this morning? Nice bit of pork, mum, suggested the man. Fillet of veal? I'm sure the veal would be a change. We haven't had any for a long time. Very good, mum. How much may we send you? About £1.50, I should think, which is £1.50 is about 750 grams, if you are metric, said Lilian, knitting her brows and trying in vain to remember the extent of Aunt Helen's weekly order. Or suppose we say £2, that's about a kilo. I expect that would be right. The meat arrived in due course, looking such a very small amount, when Nancy placed it on the kitchen table, that Lilian exclaimed in horror, Why, Nancy, that will never last us for a week. It looks hardly enough for one dinner. This is true. I did wonder. Nancy shook her head doubtfully, but did not offer any assistance in the dilemma. Perhaps if we boiled it, it might swell out a little. No. And be enough for twice, at any rate. I think you had better get a pan and put it on at once. I believe things have to boil for a long time before they're tender. Nancy obeyed without question. Now, veal is related to beef, but it's young animals that it's from, and so therefore it's a lot more tender. So this is the wrong thing to do with it. I suppose you can keep an eye on it, Miss Lilian, she observed. I shall be busy upstairs in the bedrooms this morning, and she departed with broom and dustpan, leaving her young mistress in charge of the kitchen. Lilian really did mean to look after that meat. She got it boiling briskly and filled up the pan several times with water. Then, giving it a final replenish, she ran off to practice a few scales and exercises. She was quite sure she had not been absent for more than 10 minutes, but when she returned to the kitchen, she was greeted by a strong smell of burning. Oh dear, and rushing to her pan, found that every drop of water had boiled out and the veal was frizzling at the bottom into a hard black mass. To take it off the heat was her first act, and to call Nancy to the rescue was her second. Well, it do be a pity, Miss Lilian, said that sympathising damsel, But there, don't take on so. We can cut off that black part at the bottom and put the rest down with some vegetables. Happen it'll turn out all right after all. There'll be just time afore dinner, chopping away as she spoke in a vigorous onslaught on the carrots and the onions. It was Saturday, so the children were at home, but even their healthy appetites were not equal to the very untempting dish which was set before them, for the unfortunate veal had boiled away to ribbons, and all the goodness had gone into the lost gravy, while the pulpy remains tasted so hopelessly burnt as to be perfectly uneatable. Now, this is before the days of takeaways, so they can't just order up a takeaway from down the road, can they? The vegetables are quite nice at any rate, began father cheerfully, then seeing Lilian's swimming eyes. Never mind, little woman. Experience is always dearly bought, and a vegetarian dinner won't hurt us for once in a way. Yeah, because it was not the done thing. If you had enough money for meat, you ate meat back then. A vegetarian dinner won't hurt us for once in a way. We must make out with home produce until the butcher comes again. There's a young cockerel that will do for Sunday, and perhaps I can shoot you a rabbit, and we can always fall back upon eggs and bacon at any rate. If there is nothing else to be had, cheer up. I don't expect to find a full-fledged housekeeper in 5 minutes. Because Aunt Helen hadn't been training her up to take her place. Because Aunt Helen had thought that she was going to always be there. She didn't think that she was going to get it resolved with her young man, did she? After this, Lilian determined to provide more generously and astonished the grocer by ordering 3 pounds of cayenne pepper. That's chili powder, kind of. It's a specialised one. I don't think she realises. And a like quantity of mace, embarrassing possessions which lingered in the spice cupboard for years before they were eventually finished. Mace is another thing you only use very small amounts, not because it's spicy, but because it has a strong enough flavour that you don't need a lot. Hi, Squibble, great to have you here, just grabbing a cup of tea and then you'll be back to chill. Brilliant. Get your drinks. Don't forget the snacks while you go. I've got licorice. Nah. Carrying on, and generally running the household on so liberal a scale that father had to interfere and preach economy because she's worried that they're going to run out, and so therefore she's spending way too much on food, and it's way more than they need. Such very Spartan fare was the result of his lecture that he wisely fixed her a weekly allowance. That's a good way to do it. If you set a limit, then she is much more likely to be able to fit with whatever that requirement is. So it is less and less of a problem. Anyway, I'm just having a quick look at something that's here. Oh, good. So the captions that are working now do seem to be working quite well. And I've just discovered that you can set for yourself what they look like on your screen. I don't know about if you're on a mobile device, but on my computer, there is a cogwheel down near the bottom of the video window, and on there is a section called Closed Captions Options. You click on that, and then it's got presets, which is like different coloured letters with different backgrounds. Then it's got a section where you can choose, and it will be what font, how big the letters are, what colour the letters are, whether they are lined up or not, if they're at the bottom or the top, if they can be seen through. And then the next section is effects. So that's whether it's bold, italic or underlined, and if they're crossed out or anything like that. And then background is the bit that means that if I've got white letters for the writing of the captions and I'm wearing a white shirt, you won't be able to see the letters. So if you set a background to black while you're doing it, then you can actually have it so you can, there's also a section there called opacity. So I've got mine set for translucent, which means I have a dark grey bit behind the lettering, but I can still see through the dark grey. So I don't miss out on the picture behind it, which is actually just me waving my hands around, but it means that there's a contrast between what's behind it and this bit of stuff. And then there's another section that comes that's further across, which is called window. Opacity, solid. Color, none. I'm just going to find out what that is. That's for the whole lot. And I think that's just so it makes all of the words to have a solid bit behind them. So Q is saying, Coleslaw is saying, no setting for mobile, but you can turn closed captions on now, which I haven't seen before. Yes, yes. I think they're trying to get a lot better at making some of those accessibility features more broadly available. So it's not just on a computer, it's also available on some of the mobile devices. It probably wasn't available last week or last time I read, or the time before, because the time before, for some reason, I didn't have them at all. And then last time I had those really, really weird ones that looked like I was saying all sorts of things I'd never ever said before, and also would have great big pauses and then suddenly have a whole page of writing. What it doesn't give me is a maximum of how many lines of writing, although, no, it's gone and done it again. It's meant to have a maximum of 3 lines of words, not go any higher, so therefore it doesn't come up over my face when I'm looking at it. And that setting, I think, is on my computer for my broadcast to make a limit as to how high it comes up. I wish I could make it wider for how wide the words are, but I can't do anything about that. Anyway, we'll carry on with the story. And hopefully this also means that Squibble has had enough time to get herself something to drink and some snacks. Yeah, it stacks over you here too. The setup with my stream window and everything like that is for me anyway. It comes up to about here on me, which is about 3 lines of text height. Every now and then it will have a bigger chunk and so come up to here, and then it'll drop back to 3. And I'm not quite sure why it does that, but that doesn't. We'll get past that. We're okay. And if you're over on YouTube, I have no idea whether they've got automatic captioning on there or not. I haven't loaded anything because I don't want to bother going through and correcting them over on there. I'd rather let their automatic system do it if it's available, if people want it to. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, glad to see that this version of them is working better than the last ones we had last time. They were weird, really weird. Okay. And there were no hardly any options to make any changes to them as well. I could choose if it was English or some other language. That was about it, I think. Story. Such very Spartan fare was the result of his lecture, as he was telling her she was spending too much, that he very wisely fixed her a weekly allowance and left her to manage as best she could upon it. And this plan answered far better. I would guess that Father had some idea of how much Aunt Helen used to spend because of what was available. And so therefore he would have just sort of thought, okay, well, let's just use about this much and then we can adjust it later. This plan answered far better, for she had a natural aptitude for arithmetic. She'd be looking at what's the specials for the week, if they have such a thing. If I have this much of that value and that leaves this much money left, that means I can get that much of that, which is priced differently. So she'll be doing a little bit of maths there, and soon learned to make the various items fall into their proper places, balancing her little account book in quite a professional manner. And if she likes arithmetic, then she would probably quite enjoy making the books balance for their household. About this time, too, Lilian took to poring over the ladies' column in the newspaper and trying the various recipes which were given therein. Some of them were very successful, and especially the cakes were much appreciated by the children, though others did not turn out quite what she had expected, in which case it is only charitable to suppose the oven was at fault. Sorry. Big tickle in my throat. I have no idea why. Now, if you, I keep meaning to tell you guys, I only just thought of it. I don't know why coughing made me think of it. If you know anyone who likes having stories read to them, feel free to tell them about our channel, my channel, our community. Welcome them over here. Encourage them to be part of it if they can manage it. Otherwise, send them over to YouTube to watch the VODs, the videos over there. And yes, I have stacked up a few new ones to start off the next book. Carrying on. It was only charitable to suppose the oven was at fault. There's a splendid one here, Nancy, she announced one day, under the heading of What to Do with Your Cold Mutton. You mince it all up with herbs and make it into a kind of pasty, and it sounds most delicious. It says, first take a couple of onions. By the by, did Joe bring in any onions this morning? Those in the basket are all finished. No, miss. Joe, he's never been near today, though there's master's... I'm having a trouble with words today. Trouble, yeah. No, miss. Joe, he's never been near today, though there's master's shooting boots waiting for him to clean. Oh, then do run down, Nancy, please, and ask him to dig up a few while I put the meat through the mincing machine. You'll very likely find him in the orchard or the stackyard. Nancy soon returned, flushed and out of breath, with a full apron. I couldn't find Joe nowheres, she panted, but he's put these down in the harness room, so I just took them. Shall I chop them up for you now? Oh no, I hope they're actually onions, not flower bulbs. Please do, but oh Nancy, stop, let me take a look. These are not onions, they're gladioli bulbs that David has just taken up from the garden. What a mercy you did not put them into the pasty. Pasty, not patsy. Pasty. It's like a pie some of you know of calzone or calzone, which is like a pizza that's inside its crust, where you have a pizza crust that's folded over and then it's rolled up around the edge and you've got all the insides in. Well, a pasty is the same sort of idea, but it's pastry and then it's usually some sort of dinner style of filling inside it. It's a pie, but instead of being in a pie dish, it's folded up and baked on a tray. So that's what they're talking about. What a mercy you did not put them into the pasty. We might have all been poisoned. Law, said Nancy, much abashed. I made so sure they was onions, I never thought to look at 'em. As in other words. So she thought absolutely that they were onions. But if it's only a couple you're needing, miss, there's 2 or 3 left in the larder. What that would do? Was it anything else you'll be wanting? It says, take a little dried thyme, sage, and sweet marjoram, read Lilian, with her finger on the recipe, together with a few pieces of lemon peel. I wonder what it calls a little. Oh dear. You can see what's going to happen, can't you? Yes. I haven't the slightest idea, but I suppose we must put plenty in it to make a nice flavour, but it won't taste of anything. Oh dear. So, putting a very liberal interpretation on the words, she cut up a goodly supply of those herbs and mixed them in with the meat. The pasty came out of the oven baked to a turn and smelling delicious, and Lilian felt quite a thrill of satisfaction as it was placed on the table and father began to cut it. But the ladies' column should have been a little more explicit as to the quantity of flavouring, for when it came to a matter of eating, the herbs so entirely predominated that the mutton was utterly lost. And as she had unfortunately cut up the stalks as well as the leaves, the mixture bore a horrible resemblance to chopped hay. Oh dear. It was distinctly galling, but still she learned by her mistakes. For practice gives the best training, and there is no such invaluable teacher as hard experience. Well-meaning friends were kind in their offers of help and advice, but as Lilian said, you can't run down in the middle of mixing a pudding to ask Miss Forster how much sugar to put into it, or send for the rector's housekeeper to tell you when the custard is thick enough. Mrs. Davenport told me to write her a postcard if I got into a fix, and she would come over and set me straight. But I don't think I should quite like that, and I'm sure Nancy wouldn't. I think Mrs. Davenport was the one who was horrified with what the children were doing in the paddock, remember? Who liked everything just so. Father did not encourage her to seek outside help, thinking it better that the Abbey should manage its own affairs, even at the cost of a little inconvenience, and kindly shut his eyes to many small deficiencies, knowing that time was the best remedy, and that old heads do not naturally grow on young shoulders. At first, the cares of her new position were a terrible burden on the poor child's mind, for she was, if anything, too conscientious, and almost morbidly anxious to do right and fill the place which Aunt Helen had left so empty. She would wake at 4 in the morning and not dare to close her eyes again for fear Nancy should oversleep herself, and the children be late for school. She would visit the dairy 10 times a day to see that the thunder had not turned the milk, a common belief at the time, nor the cat crept in through the window. She counted and recounted the linen and the silver, and sat worrying over her account books at night till father threatened to burn them. I think her greatest trial, however, was on the few occasions when Mr. Vaughan was obliged to stay away for the night, and leave her responsible for the safe keeping of the whole establishment. She would go round with Nancy and a candle, carefully locking all the doors and securing the shutters, peering fearfully into the cupboards and staring at her own shadow on the wall, and having finally retreated to her bedroom, would barricade the door with a tin box and place the poker handy on a chair by her bedside. But in spite of these precautions, the nights were misery all the same. Sleep refused to come. And she lay awake hour after hour, imagining every sound to be a burglar breaking into the premises, and wondering how Peggy could slumber so peacefully in the other little white bed. It is amazing, when the house is perfectly quiet, how many creaks and peculiar noises make themselves heard which we never think of noticing in the daytime. The wind blowing the ivy about would sound like a hand tapping on the pane. The cattle trampling in the fields suggested footsteps under the window, and a mouse behind the wainscot would raise her to such a pitch of panic that she would often be obliged to get up and light the candle to reassure herself, and when she at last fell asleep, it was generally with her fingers stuffed in her ears and her head buried under the bedclothes, an uncomfortable proceeding, resulting in such white cheeks and heavy eyes that father, with some difficulty finding out the cause of the trouble, never left in future without arranging for old David to sleep in the house during his absence. That's a wise move, because she hasn't yet got the discernment to be able to pick things and to tell her ears that that is a normal noise. Stop panicking. I am just going to type in a word search. See if it works. Wainscot, an area of wooden, especially oaken, panelling on the lower part of a room's walls. There you go. So where you have a wall, you have the floor, and then you have timber that comes up. It's often in vertical planks that comes up to about the height of the back of your chair, maybe slightly higher. Partly, I think, so that if the wall above that, which is normally plastered and painted, if the chairs get moved back and bump it, the plaster is not going to be damaged and fall off. The chairs are going to bruise the timber, but they are not going to wreck the plasterwork, which is a lot more easy to damage. That's possibly where the idea originally came from, and then it became a style of the way people built houses. But because of that, it's timber framing with timber planks over it, and so therefore there's room in behind, in that space between this room and that room, for mice to rattle around and scratch at things. Excuse me. More water. Right. Do let me know if you want the puzzle to be put up, because I haven't put it up today. I'm sorry. And yes, I have got it so that you guys can chat. I did remember that much. Right. Need to find out where I got to. I turned back a page to get spelling. I think during those early struggles, her correspondence with Aunt Helen was her greatest help and comfort, for to that dearest of friends she could unburden all her worries and perplexities and be sure of sympathy. And also Aunt Helen knew how things were meant to be done and could make hints or suggestions or give her instructions. "It is so hard to do exactly right," wrote Lilian, "to be generous without being extravagant, and economical without being stingy. Father says we must be careful and spend as little as we can, but things to eat seem to cost such a terrible amount all the time. All the same, I wish we could live on porridge and potatoes like the Irish do. Life would be far simpler." Forget about the Irish potato famine and things like that. The reason why they were living on potatoes and porridge. "About going on with my education, you ask if I am keeping up my French and German, but there seems really no time. The 2 hours practicing for her Frankenberg is as much as I can possibly get in. I'm busy with Nancy all morning. The music takes the best part of the afternoon. Then the children come home, and after tea I must see that they learn their lessons and go to bed. And father likes someone to talk to in the evenings. It is so dull for him if I am buried in a German exercise when he wants to tell me about the farm. I try to attack a few improving books when I can manage it. And I have begun to read Carlyle's French Revolution to father in the evenings, but I am sorry to say it generally sends him to sleep. He is so tired with the threshing just now, poor darling, and as he said one night, you see, my dear, I have so many troubles of my own at present that the trials of the French peasantry of 100 years ago seem an affair of quite minor importance. He's trying to keep the property. He's trying to make sure that they don't get into more debt and have to sell it or give it up to whoever their debt is held by. Aunt Helen's letter back was just like a little piece of her dear self. I can sympathise thoroughly with all your worries, it ran, for I too was left motherless at 16 to manage as best I could. Of course, keep up our family standard of cleanliness and order as much as you possibly can, but you will find it a mistake to be too particular and exacting. Rather, let the children run in sometimes with dirty boots than check their confidence by continual fault-finding. This is probably a little bit of the author's own mother's voice. So her mother grew up hearing the stories of her grandmother's terrible childhood because it had been so strict, and she had gone to a girls' school when they were living in South America because her father was in shipping and all sorts of things like this. And so therefore the author's mother had been determined to give the children a much more relaxed upbringing than what her own mother had spoken of so strongly. It had obviously created a very strong impression. I don't know what her own upbringing was like, but it was something that she was very determined to pass on to her children. And so I think I can hear the voice of her own mother in Aunt Helen's descriptions of how to do things, by saying that it's okay to let the children to be a little bit rough around the edges, to have a bit of fun, not just be strictly kept in order all the time. They are children after all. And that does actually explain a little bit of Aunt Helen's behaviour at the beginning when she had found some things amusing, which generally adults didn't, but she did try to keep them in order reasonably well without being too harsh. Rather, let the children run in sometimes with dirty boots than check their confidence by continual fault-finding. I am sorry that the education must needs be somewhat neglected, but after all, the other is more important. There are plenty of blue Girton girls in the world who do not seem to me to be of much use to anyone except themselves, while as the little mother of your home you are filling a place that is the sphere of every true woman. There you go. That's the bit that is specific to the time of the book. And because you have no time for reading is not any reason why your thinking powers need to rust away. There is so much wisdom to be learnt from even the little ordinary incidents of life if one knows how to appreciate them. People say one is apt to grow narrow with living in the country, but I have generally found the people who do so are those who have no interests outside the round of society pleasures or social gossip, and to my mind they would be narrow anywhere. When you know a little about botany and natural history, all the common things on the farm have something to teach you. The quaint sayings of the villagers are often as full of humour as those Scottish books over which people rave so much, and many of their stories are such interesting survivals of ancient folklore that I've often longed to collect them in writing. while surely to a thoughtful mind the constant sight of so much loveliness around tends to have a more ennobling effect than an environment of bricks and mortar and smoky chimneys, whatever the Londoners may say. Yes, there was such a snobbery between those who resided in the city and those who lived out in the country. Those from the city looked down on those who live in the country as being second rate. But in actual fact, Aunt Helen is saying that no, you get this opportunity that others don't get. It's a much healthier for yourself inside in your head as well as your body to live where you do in the country and make the most of it. Do your household duties thoroughly, but do not let them absorb you entirely, for father does not want you to be a mere domestic drudge with no ideas beyond the potato pan and the pepper pot. When I was a young girl, I often tilted up a volume of Tennyson and read snatches while I compounded a pudding, so having a book there to read while also doing the getting ready of the pudding, and found it had a wonderfully inspiring effect, and did not spoil the cooking either, for my Tennyson puddings generally turned out a great success. Excuse me, coughing again. It's that tickle that you get with a sore throat. It gets itchy and makes you want to cough. You will find the housekeeping comes easier as you grow older, as you have more experience, basically. And in the meantime, remember you are not only educating yourself, but bringing up the younger ones who look to you now instead of to me, for example, and who will be far more influenced by what you do and what you are than by any amount of good advice you may bestow upon them. Actions speak louder than words, I think is what she's trying to say. It is hard to write all this from a distance of so many thousand miles when I am longing to sit over the fire in the rose parlour and have a good chat with you like we used to do sometimes when the children had gone to bed. That's right, because Aunt Helen has gone off to India with her man, the one that she married. I'm afraid there seems very little festivity or party going for you, dear child, and I should have been glad to hear you had been asked out rather more. But after all, much society often means much rivalry and heartburning. So it saved you all that sort of heartache. I have tried both and find there is more real pleasure to be had from the intellectual than from the social side of life. For while the latter is apt to fail us just when we most require it, the former is warranted to wear well and improve with keeping. I'm not sure where that quote is from, but it's definitely in quotation marks. And so far from being affected by the changes and chances of this world, sticks by us. This is education. Um, Intellectual pursuits. When health and wealth and even friends can fall away. Hope that's not indicating something's going to happen. We are going to read another chapter, and I'm going to have a quick drink. Sorry. And a quick snack. And if you didn't actually get something to eat before, go and get yourself something now. But make it a really quick one because I'm not going to be too long. Okay? Can you hear that? Nearly there. Hi, Jay. Thank you for being here and for following. I'm going to carry on reading now. We are reading A Terrible Tomboy by Angela Brazel. And she's the lady who basically popularized schoolgirl stories. This one is not a schoolgirl story. The other ones that come after this that she wrote all are. But unlike most of the other authors who wrote the same sort of story after she did, where they would do this great big long series like Eleanor Brent Dwyer, I think her name is, or Dyer, who wrote the Chalet Girls, the Chalet School series. She wrote a great big long series of books, all interconnected, almost all of them based at the same school. Or she had a couple of other places she wrote them to. But this lady here who wrote, when she was writing her schoolgirl stories, they were not long series books. You would often have 2 or 3 books where they were interconnected because of some of the characters or some of the places, and they were about girls who were at like boarding schools and things like that. But it was not a long series. It was more exploring the relationships within each book and the adventures that they were having. And why they were so revolutionary at the time was because up until this author started writing starting with this particular book we're reading now, she wrote purely for the entertainment of her readers. Before that, and still happening while she was doing her writing, others who were writing for children were writing for their moral improvement so that they would learn good things from what they were reading. How boring. Anyway, so she decided that it would be good for girls to have something to read that they could enjoy. And what's really funny, I think, is that there were some of the schools that the girls who went there were reading her books where they would actually ban her books because they were such a corrupting influence, because the girls were actually just having fun. Not necessarily being particularly naughty, but getting up to all sorts of adventures. And they've been spoofed in a lot of ways. There's a lot of things that happen in the sort of story that are typical in the sort of stories that they are, that people consider to be strong cliches. But when this author was writing them, they were not cliches because nobody had really seriously done a lot of writing in that setting before. It's just one of those amusing things that there was even one headmistress who promised that if she found any more of these books by this author in the school, she was going to have a bonfire and burn them. That's how seriously she took it. She thought they ought to only have improving books that would give them something of a higher moral standing. You're not going to learn much from something that's dead boring. I'm sorry, but it's true. Anyway, let's get on with the story. No more lecturing. Right. We are reading A Terrible Tomboy by Angela Brazel, and this is chapter 15, The Beginning of a Shadow. Oh dear. Looking I saw where sorrow like a shadow grim did rise betwixt me and the sun. And that's the end of that little snippet of verse. Yeah, Dad, it's a good point. Clearly these people need to hear Cyndi Lauper's Girls Just Want to Have Fun. Long time later that happened. But yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing that I think happened because of it is when you have something that is fun, that you are enjoying when you're reading, you stop focusing on the skills required and you get more fluent. There's a young chap who was he was a preteen, and his mum was sending him to reading lessons because he couldn't read. Now, mechanically he could read. He could decipher words on a page, but he could not extract meaning from a page of text because he was concentrating so hard on deciphering the marks on the page that his brain wasn't putting all the pieces together to give him full fluent meaning. So he used to be in the office, and I used to have I don't know if anyone remembers them, the old Commando war comics. They're about this big, and they would come out sort of like once a month, and they were cartoon stories, like drawn stories, and they were always what ho and jolly good show old chap and that sort of thing, but a little bit later than that era. So they were set during the Second World War, and some of them were some of the other wars after that. But they were military ones where these young men were out in a situation that was dire and desperate, and then they would have to pull together and save one another and all this sort of stuff. Anyway, so I had them there because they were lightly amusing and just something to read when I wanted something to do. And they were sitting in my little office desk cupboard, and this kid was there because his mum worked until 5 o'clock and school finished at 3 or something like this, and he was having to fill in time, so he would come over and chat to me, and he asked if he could have a look through my cupboard, just because, maybe you got something interesting to do in there, and you never knew what was going to be in someone's cupboard. I was in a drawing office. I was a draftsman in an architect's office. And so I said, yeah, sure, have a look through. And so he did, and he came across these, and he asked me what they were, and I explained what they were. And so he flicked through and saw that they were mainly pictures with bits of words in the speech bubbles. And so he said, oh, can I have a look at these? And I said, yeah, of course you can. So he did. And he wanted to know what they're about because they had the pictures. They also had words. And I said, well, you read what you can and then spell out to me what you can't read, and I will tell you what that says. And so we worked on that. And because initially he would actually just flick through and read the pictures. And then after a while, he started wanting to know more about what was happening in the story because he could see there was more to it than just what the pictures showed him. And so he would actually decode these little speech bubbles, not huge, great fields of text, not huge, great walls of text, but just the little speech bubbles. That's all they were. And so he would decode these, and then every now and then he would get stuck on one. So he'd read out the bit that he had and then spell out to me the next bit that he couldn't do. And so I'd tell it to him, and he would repeat what it said that he had read with the word that I'd given him while he was looking at these speech bubbles. And so he did that, and he got faster and faster and faster, and he was very fluent with them. One day his mum discovered he was reading them. She said, I'm not so sure about my son reading war comics. I don't know that that's a good idea, which, as a mum, is code for that's not really appropriate. I wish you'd stop it. And since they're yours, you need to do something about it. And so I said to her, I don't know if you've read any of them at all, but yes, they might be set in a war setting, but there's always a sense of people having to work together to overcome a difficult situation. It's not about the war. The war is just a situation created to tell the story in. Have a look at them yourself and see what you think. And so she's, oh, okay, whatever. She didn't stop him reading them. He kept on reading them and kept on reading them. He got to the stage where he'd read all the ones that I had over and over. And so he started getting books out of the library, and he started getting teen science fiction books out of the library, and he would read them out loud to me in the office. In fact, some of the people sitting around me had to say, can we have a break from the reading now? It's just a little bit too much, because they weren't used to listening to reading out loud. But he was completely fluent in reading. And this was in less than a year. This was sort of like within a 6-month time period or even less. Yes, he had needed the mechanical skills with the extra lessons he was getting. But that on its own would not have got him fluent and wanting to read. He needed to have the opportunity to read something that appealed to him, that he was intrigued by, that the story would be so much more than just the marks on the page. So he would be hungry for what happens next, for the pictures that are drawn inside your head when you see the little wee black squiggles on the page. This is magic. These marks here are drawing pictures inside your head. In my head, when I'm reading them, and then because I'm reading them out loud, it's drawing a similar picture inside your head. I think that's magic. Anyway, so this kid, by the end of it, he was reading fluently. In fact, he discovered a bunch of different teen science fiction books that he would recommend to me. Have you read this one? Have you read this one? And they were often ones I'd never come across. But I did. I would get them out of the library and read them myself. I loved them. Wonderful. Great way to go. And I'm trying to think of why I actually was telling you all of that. Anyway, so yeah, reading is great for your brain and it's good to be stretched by it. But this is why, hi, how are you, Jay? Great that you finally actually had a chance to say hi. This is why having something that is an entertaining read is important. It doesn't have to be about whether it's stuff and nonsense, whether it's just fluff. If it's something that draws you in, it can actually still enhance the skills you have if your skills are not particularly good, because the desire to engage with what it is, to find out more, to get more out of the story. He became a voracious reader, just like gobbling books down. That was much more key than the style of book he was reading. Give a kid the tools, but also give them a book or several books or access to books which they're going to enjoy. And then you're going to have somebody who reads, somebody whose mind is expanded by the worlds that they discover when they engage in the magic of reading. Anyway, a little bit too long. Sorry about all that. I'll carry on with reading the chapter since we've only just started it. Otherwise, we'll never get there, will we? Anyway, great to have everybody here. Chat amongst yourselves. If anyone wants to do the jigsaw puzzle, put it in the chat. !jigsaw, Jigsaw. And if you can't remember how to spell it, puzzle, !Puzzle. And that will give you the link where you click on the link, and then this is obviously assuming you're doing it on a computer. I don't know how it works if you're on a mobile device. Seriously, I don't know how you guys do it, the ones who do it on mobile. But that will give you a link. You click on the link. You designate your name, I think, so that people can see who else is playing when they do something. And then you can actually participate in doing that jigsaw puzzle that you can see on the screen over there at the moment. While you're watching the stream, if you can see both things, you will see the pieces moving around, but you will be doing them in the other browser window. So that's how it works. Cool. Go for it if you want to do it. That's the way. Jigsaw. Try to keep it reasonably simple if we haven't done any today. Sometimes we've got one or two who are really hot on jigsaw puzzles, and so we bump up how many puzzle pieces there are. But if there's too many, they're the same. We don't. Anyway, we'll carry on with it. And chat among yourselves while I'm reading too. That's all good. Autumn had come, mellow and gorgeous. What was the chapter called? Oh yeah, The Beginning of a Shadow. Sorry. Autumn had come, mellow and gorgeous. The trees were turning to russet and amber and gold, and the swallows had long since flown away. The plums hung ripe and yellow upon the kitchen garden wall. You know that there are different coloured plums. There are red ones, which a lot of people know. There are also yellow ones. And then there are other ones which actually technically are plums, but they're not called plums. Green gauges. They stay green, but a different shade of green to when they're not ripe. Anyway. Plums hung ripe and yellow upon the kitchen garden wall, and the apples were piled in rosy heaps in the orchard, ready for cider making. The hop gathering was over, and the hoppers, a motley crew, had returned to the slums of Stafford and Birmingham. The men not sorry to cease hard work, but the poor draggled women and the little children with a wistful goodbye to the green fields, and all, I think, with a half sigh of regret for the rector, who had toiled unceasingly among them during their brief stay, hoping, if by ever so little, to raise the hopeless lives and the sodden minds to a knowledge of higher things. A band of gypsies was the next event. They arrived late one evening, nobody knew from where, and encamped on a patch of ground by the roadside, not very far from the abbey, much too near, father said, for the safety of his hen roosts, coming like a tribe of wandering Israelites with most of their worldly possessions on their backs. They were real gypsies too, not the fair-haired hybrid pretenders who go about in neat caravans with muslin curtains on the windows and wicker baskets slung on the top, but a dark-eyed Spanish-looking crew who put up a tent with a pole and a ragged blanket, and stewed their supper in a black cauldron hung from 3 sticks set in the ground. So what he was talking about there, the hybrid ones, are what we would now call travellers in the UK. Um, there are gypsies and there are travellers. Gypsies can be travellers, but travellers are not necessarily gypsies. Gypsy is actually it's kind of like a nationality. There is a effectively a racial background to it. So it's a group of people who have the same background country-wise where they've come from, the different languages that they have spoken together, the similarity in body structure and type and look, color and hair and all that sort of stuff that goes with it, like different nationalities. But they are a traveling people. We knew people who were gypsies when we were in England, but they were settled gypsies. They were not traveling gypsies, which is not unusual. But it's just like saying someone saying, "Oh, I'm Welsh or I'm Scottish or I'm whatever like that." But in this day and age of when the story is written, they were still travellers. But by then, you were also getting people who wanted a travelling lifestyle who were not gypsies. Yeah, Romani. Or Romani, depending on how you want to say it. And there are some other ones that are similar to that. There's a group of languages that they speak. They're not all the same language. I've got a friend, an English friend, an English online friend who lives in France. She's actually French now, who knows a bunch of different conversational pieces from Romani and some other things. You have a friend who's part of that community. Wonderful. It can be a very, very difficult lifestyle, but it can also be something that has some quite strong positive things about it too, like any different cultural group. And that's how for me I see it as being that's the word I was thinking of, a cultural group, where you have these things in common and the background in common. But it was not uncommon, and this is probably what we're going to see in our story, unfortunately. It was not uncommon for theft to go on, to have chickens going missing and things like that, because there was a little bit of an attitude of them and us. Normal settled society would look down on the gypsies would look down on normal settled society, and so you get this tension between them, but you also have different cultural things that are accepted. You do not steal from those within your cultural group, but it's okay to steal from somebody else because they're not us, they are them. And so you get a little bit of that sort of comes out, and I'm pretty sure it's going to come out in the story too, unfortunately. So, but we're not going to tar everybody with the same brush. We're just going to accept that this is the way the story is at the time, how it was common societal perception. Right? Please don't get upset with it. The children came across them suddenly, just as the sun was setting, and the picturesque scene stirred Peggy's sense of romance, perhaps also her budding artistic taste, to the core. The whole family was gathered together on the grass round the wood fire, the smoke of which rose up faintly blue against the russet of the beechwoods behind. Handsome, fierce-eyed men lying slouchingly idle on the ground, smoking short black pipes. Slatternly women with gay handkerchiefs tied round their black hair, bustling about with something savoury inside tin cans. Ragged, brown-skinned little children, gnawing at bones with savage haste, while a few disreputable dogs waited eagerly for the scraps that were thrown to them from time to time. A small cart, laden with brooms and coarse crockery, was tilted up by the hedge, while a couple of worn-out old donkeys with clogs tied to their legs I don't get that, sorry, tied to their legs, cropped the grass close by with dejection in their drooping ears. Yes, poor donkeys have a very hard time in lots of places and in lots of societies. I'm guessing the clogs was to stop them taking off. They'd make a noise rattling together or something. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to come out. I'm sure they're talking Romani, said Peggy, squeezing Bobby's arm hard in her excitement and drawing him behind a bush so as to watch the scene unobserved. What a queer life. Just think of getting up every morning and not knowing where you're going to be by night and sleeping under that dirty tent. I wonder what they have in that cauldron. It smells nice at any rate. They're rather too oniony. Pheasants, I should think, and rabbits that they have poached, whispered Bobby. The keepers will have a lively time tonight. I wonder where they've prigged the onions. Let's pinch them. Low as the children had spoken, the sharp ears of the gypsies had heard them, and a withered witch-like old crone, all the stereotypes, came hurrying up from a group near the fire with an eager glitter in her eye. Tell your fortune, my little master. Tell your fortune, my pretty lady. Cross the poor gypsy's hand with a silver sixpence, that the planets may work. We haven't any money, said Peggy hurriedly, a little scared when it came to meeting the tribe at such close quarters. Ah, but no doubt the little lady's father is at home at the big house yonder, and she can get a silver piece from him and come back to the poor old gypsy. He's gone to Warford this evening. Silly girl. He's gone to Warford this evening, began innocent Bobby. There isn't anybody at home at all. He needs to kick up the pants. But the more wary Peggy, seeing the folly of such revelations, gave him a nudge and the emphatic hint. Shut up. The pretty thing at the young lady's neck would do as well, continued the woman in a wheedling voice, eyeing Peggy's brooch. Or the little gentleman's silver chain? Oh, I won't keep them, missy, only hold them in my hand for a minute to influence the stars. You trust the poor gypsy and she'll tell you what the future has in store for you. But Peggy and Bobby were not so simple as to be taken in by such palpable guile, and they walked on, with the old crone following persistently in their wake, at first clamouring for some trifle and then hurling curses at their heads. As she passed the encampment, she said something in Romany, and one of the men sprang to his feet with a shrill whistle. The terrified children took to their heels, and I don't really know what might have happened, only, fortunately, the familiar figure of old Barlow, the village cobbler, appeared stumping down the road in the distance. He was not generally a very attractive person, being snuffy in appearance and crusty in temper, but tonight no fairy prince could have been more appreciated, and they flew to him, each seizing one of his horny hands. That's calluses, hard calluses across the palms of his hands, from the hard work he used to do, with an enthusiasm which much surprised him. They were ever afterwards fully persuaded that but for his timely arrival they would have been robbed and murdered, and their bodies hidden away from their sorrowing relatives like Eugene Aram's victim, or the little princes in the tower. English history, I suppose. And they felt quite an affection for Barlow in consequence, so much so that Bobby determined to wear out his boots as fast as possible, that he might put some business in the old man's way. Did we do that puzzle before or not? I hope not. I hope I haven't gone and given you the same puzzle repeatedly. Well done, thank you. Sheep in the road. I think that was because we had something in the story. Oh, when the kids went up the mountain. Sheep in the road in England. Image credit Kevin Eves, and it's from Shutterstock. When the children went up the mountain with father in Wales. There you go. That's what that was from. 12 pages left. I can give you another one. I'll just need to get that set up for you. Sorry about that. Just a moment. If you are interested, I will give you another one. I normally have this ready and I didn't today because I've been doing a whole bunch of other bits and pieces. It's probably all sheep ones too, by the way. Because at the time I was looking for where my keyboard usually is. At the time I was looking for puzzles, it was around the part of the story where the children were up in the mountains in Wales with their father. You can't do anything with it until I give you the new link. So, and I will give you that in a moment. I just will set this up. So this is 104 pieces. Do you want it a little bit harder than the last one? Because the last one was about the same. Or do you want it just left the same because we're about halfway through this chapter and it's not going to be a long read. I'll give it a moment for you guys to be able to catch up with what I'm saying. Harder, okay. I won't make it super hard. How's that? 126. We'll go with that, I think. I'm not going to make it super hard because otherwise people who might otherwise take part in it might find it a little bit too difficult for them. And I'll copy this and then I will paste it into the command, and then you can pull it up as soon as I've got that in there and told you that it's ready to go. And that should be ready to go now. There you go. Give that a try. That should give you the puzzle link, a new version of the puzzle link, and then we can carry on. Right. Bobby determined to wear out his boots as fast as possible that he might put some business the old man's way, because he's a cobbler. Though Mr. Vaughan did not take quite such a serious view of the episode, he thought the gypsies were certainly undesirable additions to the countryside and sent a hint to the local police, with the result that when Peggy and Bobby screwed up their courage and dared each other to go and have another peep at the encampment, they found the tent struck, that means being taken down, and the wanderers flown with nothing to mark their passing visit but a few dirty pieces of paper and the ashes of the wood fire, though loud complaints from neighbouring farmers as to missing ducks and geese and traces of snares found by keepers in the preserves showed that they had not gone away empty-handed. They probably were kind of expecting that sort of thing to happen. It used to happen in a lot of places that they would go. The gypsies were soon forgotten in the excitement of cider making, for the ripe piles of apples had been gathered into the big barn, and the children liked to watch the great press as its stone roller slowly crushed the fruit into pulp and let the juice escape into the trough below. It always seemed a pity, Peggy thought, to make the nice apples into such horrid stuff as cider. Oh, good. So pleased to see that, Dad. Dad says, oh, it works on mobile browser. Just thought I'd pass that one on. Absolutely excellent to know. Yes, the cider they're talking about here, because it's stuff that is preserving it so that it can be used later in the year, will be hard cider because the alcohol will be preserving it. So it's allowing it to brew a little bit, to ferment. And so that will be why Peggy thought it was such horrid stuff. And she was glad David stored so many apples away in the loft for winter use. And in the meantime, she and Bobby consumed such quantities that Father declared they would both be breaking out into leaves and blossom in the springtime. The blackberries were ripe too, and there were many expeditions in search of them, mostly in their own fields, for the hedgerows abounded in the purple fruit, and Lilian's housekeeping soul was at present bent on jams and cordials. So jams are where you preserve the fruit with sugar, and jam is what North Americans, especially USA Americans, call jelly, except that it hasn't had all the pips and pulp and everything removed from it. That's why theirs is called jelly, as they don't usually have the seeds and everything in it, whereas jam usually has all of that stuff still in it, so it gives it a lot of texture. So jams and cordials. Cordials are where you make a drink, a concentrated juice for making a drink from the fruit. And it's yummy, and it's a great way to save something so you can get the benefit of it later in the year. On one Saturday afternoon, Peggy had had a long scramble through copse and bracken, over fences and among stubble fields, and had filled her big basket almost full, somewhat to the detriment of her costume, her outfit, and fingers, and she was now working her way home along the edge of the pasture, picking as she went. She had climbed up the bank to reach a particularly luscious-looking cluster from the long trailing brambles overhead, when voices below attracted her attention. And peeping through the hedge, she saw two horsemen riding slowly along the bridle path beneath. Now, bridle, as in horse's bridle, the leather straps that go round a horse's head to help with controlling the horse. And a bridle path is a pathway, a trackway, a public right-of-way for riding horses along. And it's a very common thing in England throughout the countryside. There are places where it's private land, but the land is crossed by a bridle path or a footpath. And so a bridle path will be one where you can ride it along it with horses. And they used to be common, not for things like carts and stuff like that, but just a way of going places that had been used for a long time. And so that's why they stayed as being publicly accessible. And it's lovely that they've got them. Try to find where I was up to. 2 horsemen riding slowly along in the bridle path beneath. The first was a lean, spare man with grey side whiskers and a slight stoop, whose rather sporting attire accorded ill with his sharp, keen face, while the second, the one on the better horse, was stout and ruddy of countenance, a man who looked as though he would be more at home in a bar parlour than in a drawing-room, and who held himself with a complacent air as one who is satisfied both with the world in general and himself in particular. "That is the house," said the first, reining in his horse just below where Peggy was standing, and pointing with his riding whip at the Abbey. "It is a fine old property, and has grand capabilities about it too." It would want a good deal of repairing," remarked the other, tugging at his sandy moustache. "I should pull down that tower in the older part and throw out a billiard-room and a conservatory. I suppose the stables would all want rebuilding, and no doubt that wood could be cleared and turned into pleasure grounds. It would cost a sight of cash to do it all, ship-shape. Not that that's much odds to me if a thing takes my fancy. This grassland would be grand for a racer or two, horse racing, raising horses. I've my eye on the Melton sweepstakes yet. When did you say it falls due?" "Next July," returned the thin man, lowering his voice. "Of course they will try every end up to meet it. But unless they can raise it privately, which doesn't seem very likely, there isn't a soul who would lend..." Excuse me. The next part of the itchy nose. "There isn't a soul who would lend them more than 2/3 of the amount on the security, so that the thing is as good as done." Thank you. Eavesdropping was certainly not one of Peggy's besetting sins, but she could not help overhearing all that was said, and as the pair rode on down the path towards the gate, she picked up her basket and walked in the same direction on her own side of the hedge, so as to get a good look at them if possible. At the gate they paused, for it was shut, and he of the grey whiskers, after fumbling at the latch with his whip, was evidently preparing with much reluctance to dismount, when, spying Peggy, he called to her and asked her to open it. Peggy felt half inclined to refuse and turn away, for she did not like his tone. But her kindly country instinct prevailed, and she swung it open wide. He rode through without even a thank you. But his companion fumbled in his waistcoat pocket, and scarcely stopping to look at her, flung her a penny as he passed. All the proud Vaughan blood rushed into Peggy's face. In a fury of wrath, she seized the offending coin and flung it after its donor. But like many of our keenest shafts, it fell harmless, for she missed her aim, and the horsemen rode on, sublimely unconscious of the storm they had left behind them. Probably just as well. "That they should dare," said Peggy, hotly to herself, flushing all over with indignation. "I suppose they took me for a village child. I'm afraid I do look rather untidy with blackberrying, but all the same they might have seen the difference. I wish I had never gone near the gate and let them open it for themselves. David," she said to the old man, who was coming across the field with a sack of potatoes, "who are those people riding along the pasture? I can't call them gentlemen." "Who be they too, Miss Peggy?" said David, laboriously putting down the sack and shading his eyes with his hand. "Where did you say they be?" "In the pasture. Oh, look quick, or they'll be gone," cried Peggy impatiently at his slow ways. "Oh, I know they. Yes, I do for sure. I seed 'em round t'other side of the field 5 minutes agone. The thin un in front be Mr. Reed, the lawyer for Warford, and a tight-fisted rascal he be, too, from all they say. It's heaven help them as Lawyer Reed gets his teeth into, and the big stout man be Mr. Norton, the distiller, him as has those works t'other side of Warford, and runs half the drink shops in the town, to say naught of the country publics he owns to," publics being a public bar or a pub. Publics he owns too. The teetotalers call him old Blazers, partly to favour his red face and partly as he keeps his whisky traffic going so briskly. He's worth a power of money, he be, but it all comes out of poor folks' pockets, what ought to be put to a better use. So that was the father of Phyllis and Marjorie Norton. That vulgar man with the loud voice and the coarse red face and those pretty frocks and handsome carriages were all paid for out of the ruin of poor people's homes. For the lower parts of Warford had a bad character, and the clergy waged ceaseless war against the terrible curse of drink. Yeah, there was a big problem at different times in British history with people who were living very, very basic lives. They were working in factories or as labourers and stuff like that. And so because life was such hard work for them and there was not a lot of fun to be had, it's not too hard to understand that they would spend a lot of time drinking to drown their sorrows. But unfortunately, that meant that there was money that wasn't going towards food and helping their families either. And of course, when they get a little bit too drunk, and if they're an angry sort of a person because of the life that they've got going on, they can tend to take it out on their family as well as other people. It's a vicious circle. "What are they doing in our fields?" inquired Peggy, suddenly recalling the conversation she had inadvertently overheard, the remembrance of which had been lost in the heat of her wrath. "Why, there be a right away across the pasture and through the hazelwood, though it's not as many ever uses it. Where they could be a-going passes me, for it don't lead to nowhere except on the high road again, and it's not in sense that they should just ride out of their way just to come round by the Abbey." Having a look. Peggy thought privately that that must have been exactly their reason, but she said nothing to David on the subject, reserving further inquiries for Lilian, whom she ran home to give a full description of her encounter. Whatever could he mean, Lilian? He talked almost as if the Abbey were his, and said he should pull down the tower and do ever so many other things. Do you think he could be mad? To her surprise, Lilian took the matter only too seriously. "Oh, Peggy dear," she said, putting down the pile of stockings she was darning, "I don't know whether I ought to tell you or not, but you seem so much older now than you used to, and I think I can trust you not to talk about it to anybody. Poor father is most dreadfully worried just at present, for you see, this Mr. Norton has a mortgage on the estate." "What's that?" inquired Peggy. "I'm afraid I can't explain business things very clearly, but a lot of money was lent on the understanding that if it was not paid back, the Abbey should go instead of it." "Did father have the money?" "Oh, no, I believe our great-grandfather had some, and then grandfather and Uncle Charlie, who died, had the rest. It has been going on for years and years, and father has been kept trying to pay it off, but he never could manage it." "Oh, dear." "Of course, it was not Mr. Norton who lent it at first, but through this Mr. Reed, the lawyer, he has what is called bought up the mortgages, and now he claims all the money back. And I'm afraid from what you heard today he will take the Abbey if he does not get it." Peggy was aghast. That it was possible for the Vaughans and the Abbey to ever be dissevered had never before entered into her calculations. The family had always been at the Abbey ever since they had the land. So in her mind, she has never ever considered that they might be separated from one another. It's so much part of who they are for her. And the prospect was so terrible that she thrust it from her with scorn. "It can't be," she cried. "They couldn't turn us out of the Abbey when we've always lived here. Father will get the money somehow. Perhaps Mr. Neville or the rector would lend it to him." I don't think she has any idea of how much money it really is. "They haven't got it." Lilian shook her head sadly. "They haven't got it to lend. They are neither of them really well off, you know, and it is such a large sum. But I keep hoping all the time that we may find some way out of the trouble. I don't know whether to tell father or not what you heard today. I'm afraid it will only worry him." "I think perhaps he ought to know," said Peggy briefly, as she turned and went out, to hide a suspicious choking sensation in her throat. Then, going into the ruins, she climbed up onto the old wall from which the best view of the house and its surroundings could be obtained, and gazed with new eyes at the panorama of her home. And as her glance travelled slowly from orchard to stackyard, from meadow to garden, back to the ivy-clad tower and the red-gabled roof, I think, she said slowly, that if we had to leave the Abbey, it would break my heart. And I'm sorry, but that's the last page of the chapter and the last chapter I'm reading today because it's now 5 o'clock. My goodness gracious me. So, I've been picking away at the old cover, the lining on the old cover of my iPad. It's got flaky bits on it. It's gone everywhere. It's so good to have you all here. It's so good that you're able to enjoy the stories, even if they've got some really weird things that go on in them and some strange attitudes and all that sort of stuff. Sorry, I'm just shaking the crumbly bits off my book stand. Do you like my book stand? I got that a while ago through a New Zealand retailer called Mighty Ape. They have a wish list system where if you want things for yourself, you create a wish list and you don't have to get it straight away. This is if you're a New Zealand resident and have a New Zealand address. But then they will notify you, they will email you when things on your wish list are on special. And so normally I wouldn't have paid for this one, but not the price that they originally had it at. But then it was on special, so it was a bit less. And I had already stopped and sorry, I'm getting the dust off using an old paintbrush. No, it's not one that I'm wrecking. It was already wrecked a long time ago and it's not high quality. Don't panic, Squibble. It's okay. Sorry, Squibble's an artist and is highly respectful of her brushes and looks after her equipment properly. Unlike me, who just has things to use as a tool for something, and I don't use brushes for most things. I usually use them for things like dusting stuff. And yeah, paintbrushes, a reasonable paintbrush, not a fancy one, are quite good for getting the dust out of the keyboard on your computer. Try it sometime. But unplug the keyboard first because otherwise you might do some strange things on your computer accidentally. Anyway, so I was able to, I took, it's okay, I have several dust brushes. That's great, that's good to know. This is a really coarse one, sort of like the old school brushes, but not quite as bad as that. And it's brilliant for that sort of thing because the bristles are stiff enough to be able to move the dust along after it's been stuck there for a while. So the stand, I had a look at it quite seriously. The main part of it is timber. The rest of the base of it's made out of cardboard or something like that with a cheap plastic coating on it that looks like wood but isn't. Looks from a distance like wood. But the rest of it's actually out of beech wood, which is grown in Europe and parts of Asia, and it's a renewable resource and it's quite pleasant. But I looked at it, and even making it out of pine, because my husband's a very, very skilled carpenter, he could make one for me. But materials and time would take a lot longer than the cost of buying it even when it was retail. So when it came on special, I got it for myself since I figured I'm reading 3 days a week and it's so much easier than holding the iPad up and getting an ache in my wrists from holding it up all the time. And it means I don't put the thing down and having it slide all over the place. And it's like, yeah, I'll get that for myself. And so I did. And it's been such a great thing to have. I just prop my book up on it, my ebook. I can also put up a normal book on it if I want to. It's got two little flaps that poke up to hold the pages so they don't turn over. It's great. And it just works so well. I actually had considered getting a little cheap easel, one of the really cheap, nasty ones from somewhere like the Warehouse, but this came up and I thought, no, definitely I'm going to get this. It's now for me, it's one of my tools. And if I look at it that way, it makes so much sense. That puzzle's coming along very nicely. Now, what I can see in the top half of that picture is a water wheel on a mill. And that was how they used to, that was the driving force, the power to make certain things work. Um, if you had a stream, you could direct the stream by cutting a little, yeah, treat myself, that's exactly it. That you could have, if the stream was a reasonable flow, but you wanted a more specific amount of water coming through, you'd dig a ditch that was specially to take the water from the main stream to where your mill house was, to provide water to drive that water wheel round. And then in the mill house, you would have grinding stones that would grind wheat to make flour. And because flour is used in bread and cakes and so many other things, and a real staple for a lot of people's diets. And most people could not afford to get a system for actually doing it themselves, and so you would have a miller in a village area, and you might grow your own grain, but you would take your grain to the miller, and the miller would grind it for you and put it into sacks, and then you'd take it home, and you'd probably leave a certain number of them as payment with them, I think would be how it was done, as a ratio. If you had more money, then you'd actually literally pay him with money to grind the flour for you, and then you'd sell it or you'd use it or whatever, and it would go into storage if you were using it at home, and then it's available later on through the year, because grain is only harvested at a certain time of year. It's in autumn when the wheat plants have grown up, they have developed the grain. Wonderful, that's come up really well, and it's got those sheep at the front. The wheat seeds have become hard and dry in the ears of the grain. Sheep and Mill in Pennsylvania. Well done, well done. And that's from Brant Boulding on Shutterstock. And I love the fact that they actually allow us to be able to use the stock pictures for the puzzles. That's actually through the puzzle site, and it's fully permitted type system. Yes, that one was a little, I did wonder if it was going to be, because it's got so many different greens in it, which is why I didn't go even higher with the number of puzzle pieces. Ta-da! Exactly. Fabulous. So I'm going to sign off now. It's been really great having you all here. Yeah, because some people use different names when they're actually registering on the puzzle to what they use as their screen name. So it was probably Jay and Dad doing the puzzle. Thank you for being here. Thank you for participating in the chat. Thank you for enjoying the company together. It's lovely. I really enjoy having you guys all here to do the reads, to just talk about all sorts of things, you know. Lots and lots of fun. Hi, Goriki. Good to see you. For those who don't know, Goriki is one of the Codex readers. Codex, there's a logo down there below where the jigsaw puzzle used to be. Yeah, I'm not going to send you all over to Kibo's stream, because Kibo streams 18 plus, and this is a granny safe setting. Sorry about that. You're most welcome to go over to Kibo's stream if you want to, but I am not going to go and raid it, just because I'm not going to take responsibility for taking a bunch of grannies and their grandkids over to an 18 plus stream. So you are most welcome to go there if you want. Search for Kibo. I think Kibo's on our Codex team officially now, aren't they? It's been lovely having you all here, by the way. Dad, are you in New Zealand or Australia that you're saying afternoon? Oh, yeah. Thank you, Goriki. That's great. Sorry, my mouse cable's in the wrong place, and I'm not typing in the right place either. Australia, yeah, great. So, Goriki, have you got somewhere in mind that you're thinking of? Do you want to let me know, or anything else like that? I'm guessing you've already been talking to me over here. No, that's somebody else. Sorry, I'm just checking, because sometimes people will talk to me over on Discord to let me know things I need to know about, and I have to remember to actually check. Sorry. I think we should go and raid somebody. Oh, owls. Let's go and see the owls. See what they're up to. They had one of the owls came back to the house just recently. I know this. I know this because I saw there was a clip about it. So Hoot House live stream. We're going to go and raid Hoot House live stream. Go and say hi to them. Yay, Squibble's all excited about the owls. Go and say hi to them. You can tell them what we've been doing. They're usually delighted to know that we've been reading and all that sort of stuff. It's usually quite late in the evening for them, so don't be surprised if the chat gets very, very quiet after they've welcomed us for being there. But yeah, do go and say hi. Great to have you all here. In the meantime, happy reading.